Hello everyone, welcome to Psychology 303, Analysis of Everyday Behavior, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about reinforcement. So I've already mentioned a little bit that reinforcement is probably the best strategy to use to try and modify behavior. And specifically, we use reinforcement to increase a behavior in some way. Oftentimes, it's a desirable behavior, something we want to do more, such as eating healthier or exercising. We use this technique of reinforcement to increase this desirable behavior. Reinforcement is effective because it happens immediately after a behavior occurs, or that's when reinforcement is most effective. And for the most part, the reinforcement reliably follows the behavior. So we'll talk about different schedules of reinforcement later, but generally when a behavior is reinforced every time, it's going to increase the likelihood of that behavior occurring in the future. And reinforcement only occurs if that behavior increases in some way, be it frequency or duration or any of the other characteristics we've talked about. So one of the earliest demonstrations of reinforcement was by Thorndike in 1911. We talked a little bit about the law of effect, where if something good happens after a behavior, that person is going to continue to behave in that same way. And Thorndike examined this within a situation where a cat was placed into a box, a plate of food was placed just outside of the box, and the only way that the cat could get outside of the box was by pressing a lever that opened up a door. Well, obviously the cat didn't know this. This was the first time the cat was in the box, so the cat kind of fumbled around and started to get really frustrated that the cat couldn't get out, and accidentally hit the lever, the door opened, and the cat was able to get to the food. Next time the cat was placed in the box, the cat knew that it could get out but didn't exactly know how, so kind of fumbled around, again pressed the lever, and every time the cat was placed in the box, it took less and less time for the cat to actually press the lever and escape and get out. So the behavior that was being reinforced was pressing the lever, and the immediate consequence of that, or the reinforcement of that behavior, was getting to the food. So this is one of the earliest demonstrations of reinforcement leading to an increase in a very specific behavior. And this kind of analysis, or this demonstration, has been replicated with rats. B.F. Skinner and his Skinner box, where a rat was placed in a box where if the rat pushed down on the lever, a pellet of food or a drop of water would be given to that rat, and so that kind of reinforced the rat pressing the lever. And there have been a lot of different variations of the Skinner box, but the kind of baseline idea is the same for all of them. And it also works on humans. We behave in ways in which we get positive reinforcement, in which we end up with consequences that are beneficial to us. And different types of reinforcement or different positive consequences can result from the same behaviors. So, for example, exercising more, many of us do this because we feel good afterwards. We get maybe this kind of runner's high, or we get our adrenaline pumping, and that's the positive consequence that we end up with. And for others, it could be more materialistic positive consequences. It might be to win prizes, win money, win gold medals, for example. So there are some terms that are important to understanding reinforcement. We've talked about target behaviors. In terms of reinforcement, it's really operant behavior is what we're going to be focusing on. This is an example of operant conditioning. That's a term you may be familiar with from intro classes. That's the behavior that's strengthened by reinforcement. A reinforcer is some kind of event or stimulus or consequence that subsequently strengthens that operant behavior. What's reinforcing the behavior? And strengthening behavior, again, more often than not, we're talking about frequency, making sure that you're exercising more or eating healthier more often, but it can apply to some of these other characteristics of behaviors, such as duration, intensity, or latency. When we strengthen the behavior, we want to increase one of these characteristics, and it needs to kind of occur gradually over time. And one of the probably most important parts of reinforcement that I want to stress is that it's not the person that's being reinforced. You can reward a person, but you're reinforcing the behavior. So we're always focusing on behavior. We're not focusing on the specific individual that's performing that behavior. So what are some other types of reinforcement? We've kind of outlined what reinforcement is. There are some variations to this. So many of you have probably heard the terms positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is typically what you think of, what comes to mind when the word reinforcement is thrown around. It's kind of adding some kind of stimulus, some kind of event or object after a behavior has occurred, or increasing the intensity of this event or object after a specific behavior has occurred. So if I exercise on that specific day, I reinforce that behavior by giving myself $1. Or if I exercise on Monday, I get $1. If I exercise on Tuesday, that's 2 days in a row, I get $2 on that day, maybe $3 a day after, increasing the intensity of this kind of reinforcer. So after a behavior occurs, a person gets something. The reinforcer appears. Some kind of positive stimulus, positive outcome occurs. That's positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement focuses still on ideal behaviors, on desirable behaviors. We want those to increase. But instead of giving someone something, we take something bad away. So maybe it's the case where loud noise is playing, and so we want a person to press a button. Every time they press that button, the loud noise goes away. Or research using rats, for example. They might have electricity running through the floor, and unless the rat presses the lever, that electricity won't go away. So we're trying to increase the behavior of pressing down a lever by then removing that negative stimulus, that aversive situation, the electricity being going through the floor. So it's important to reiterate here, with negative reinforcement, yes, it has negative in the term, but it's a good thing. We're trying to increase the likelihood of desirable behaviors occurring. Negative reinforcement rather, is not the same thing as punishment. And a lot of times people use these two terms interchangeably. It's important to separate. We're going to be talking about punishment in a few weeks. But negative reinforcement is still focused on desirable behaviors. We're increasing the likelihood of desirable behaviors occurring by removing something negative from the environment. With positive reinforcement, we're introducing something positive to the environment to, again, increase or reinforce specific behaviors. So it's probably the easiest way to try and disentangle those two. Within negative reinforcement, there are two types of behaviors that we can use negative reinforcement to reinforce or to increase. We can increase the likelihood of escape behavior occurring. So that's when we may be in a negative situation currently and the behavior helps us remove ourselves from that. So that would be if we hear a loud noise occurring, we'd behave in a way to get rid of the loud noise, to escape that situation. It could be if we have more real-world situations, if we're on a hot floor, we kind of step off the hot floor to stop our feet from burning. Those are examples of escape behavior. Avoidance behavior is when we behave in a way to prevent ourselves from entering into those negative situations in the first place. So maybe we know that in that room there's going to be a loud noise. So an avoidance behavior would be to not go in that room in the first place, or to go into a different room. If we know we're going to burn our feet on the hot floor, we put shoes on before we go into that room to prevent that negative situation from occurring, that negative stimulus from happening. So those are examples of avoidance behavior. And negative reinforcement can focus on either of those situations. So that's the difference between positive and negative reinforcement. We can also have differences between social and automatic reinforcement. The difference here is pretty simple. Social reinforcement occurs when another person is enacting the reinforcer. So a teacher, to encourage people raising their hands when asking questions, may smile at the person if they raise their hand instead of just blurting out a question. Or maybe giving a correct answer in class, a teacher may give a thumbs up. More automatic forms of reinforcement occur without another person being involved whatsoever. So if you want to encourage someone to press a switch on a remote control to turn on the TV, every time they press the on button, the TV turns on automatically. Someone else isn't there to switch on the TV. It just happens automatically. Every time you put your key in the ignition in a car, or nowadays press the ignition button, your car's going to start. That's an example of a specific behavior, turning a key or pressing a button, being reinforced by the car starting. And that happens automatically. No one's there to switch on the car every time you turn the key or press the button. We don't normally think about that as reinforcement, but reinforcement is happening in that situation. So that's social and automatic reinforcement. We can also focus in on the reinforcement itself, or the reinforcers, and we can have conditioned or unconditioned reinforcers. Unconditioned reinforcers are examples of things that naturally encourage us to behave in specific ways. So we can think about food, we can think about water, we can think about things that we kind of biologically need, sleep, for example. All of these function the first time they're presented to a person. So what does that mean? That means that, for the example of the cat, if they're placed into a box, they see the food, they're going to want that food. They know what that food means to them. Or a baby is going to get hungry, it's going to want food, so it's going to learn how to communicate with his or her parents to try and get food. It's going to try and sign, hey, I'm hungry, I want some food. Conditioned reinforcers are things that are possibly initially neutral the first time you encounter them, but people can use them to then get food, water, sleep, etc. Get some of these things that are more unconditioned. So probably the best example of this is money. The first time you encounter money, you don't really know what it is as a child, but then you begin to understand that you can use money to get what you want, to get food, to get attention, to get water, to get sleep, etc., etc. Another example of this would be a token economy or a token reinforcement program. We're going to be talking a little bit about this later on in the quarter, but this is where you get some kind of token. Could be a coin, it could be a button, and then you can trade in these at some later date for a different prize. Could be food related, could be a toy that makes you happy, things like that. So conditioned reinforcers are things that you can use to then get unconditioned reinforcers. And more often than not, as is in the case with money, they can be a generalized conditioned reinforcer, where you can use this to get multiple different types of unconditioned reinforcers. So you can get food, you could get water, or you could get any of these other things that are more unconditioned reinforcers. And lastly, I want to mention the Premack principle. This is the idea where it might not necessarily be an event or an object that will reinforce a specific behavior or encourage a specific behavior, but it could be a whole different behavior. So the idea behind the Premack principle is getting people to perform this behavior that maybe they don't really want to do, a less desirable behavior. And if and only if they perform that behavior, they can then perform a more desirable behavior. So a prime example of this would be if you really want your child to do their homework, you say, all right, if you do your homework, if you finish everything, then you'll have time to play. So in this case, the operant behavior or the target behavior is the child doing homework, but then the reinforcer is the child being able to play. It's a whole nother behavior that you're kind of dangling in front of the child saying, hey, you'll get this ideal situation if you perform this target behavior. So that's all I have for now on reinforcement. We'll get into a little bit more detail about the influences on reinforcement in the next video. But until then, I will see you in the next video. Thanks.